Let me perhaps make 4 remarks in the short time that I have to propose some ways forward. The first remark will be on the universal credit scheme that was set up 10 years ago as a means to simplify the system of access to social benefits by bringing various benefits into one single universal credit scheme. The universal credit presents major deficiencies. First of all, as we know from various studies, it is set at a too low level to protect people from poverty. The calculations from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which proposed with others this idea of the essentials guarantee that should be taken into account, is that for an adult to have an adequate standard of living in the UK today, £120 per week were required when, as you know, universal credit is set at £85, £134 for a couple. And moreover, almost half the beneficiaries of universal credit today have their payments reduced, in particular to pay back debts to the Department of Work and Pensions. So the level is too low. The benefits are capped, moreover, since 2016, and that level has been frozen since that year. And one other problem is that, of course, there is this 5 weeks delay before you can obtain the first payment from universal credit following your filing of a claim. And although advance payment may be received, this is, of course, deducted from the first payments that you receive. Moreover, we still have in place this 2-child benefit cap affecting 1.5 million children. The estimate is that if this cap were to be removed, it would cost £1.3 billion to the Treasury, but that would lift 250,000 children out of poverty and support some 850,000 more children that are today in deep poverty. And I'll return to this point. I think it's the single most important investment a country can make in its future to combat child poverty. Now, in this broad discussion on universal credit, one issue I would like to particularly emphasize is the issue of non-take-up of universal credit. I dedicated a report to the issue of non-take-up of rights in the field of social protection. And I was struck to find that the NGO Citizens Advice, advising people as to how they can claim their rights, estimated that 1 in 4 people that they assist spend more than a week to prepare the claim to obtain the universal credit. Claims are made online, but as we heard earlier, 1 in 6 persons in the UK do not have regular internet access, and moreover, they experience many difficulties in filing a claim because they cannot find the documentation required to prove a health condition, to prove their housing costs, to prove the child care arrangements they have to make, and as a result, many cannot actually file the claim in the right conditions. Others may fear to file a claim because they fear that the children may be removed from the family if the child is considered at risk of ill treatment as a result of the family being destitute. And we heard the comment from Angela from ATD Fourth World in this regard. So I think that is the first recommendation we may wish to think about: how to improve the universal credit scheme, how to increase the level of support provided, and how to reduce the significant rate of non-take-up that we still have. Under human rights law, there is a requirement not only that universal credit, social protection schemes, minimum income schemes allow people to have access to an adequate standard of living, it's also a requirement that the levels are regularly increased in line with the consumer price index, in line with the evolution of the cost of living. But this is not done automatically in the UK, and we have many families today who fear that in March, April, the government will not raise the level of universal credit to take into account the very high inflation rates we've been witnessing over the past couple of years. So that is, I believe, the first recommendation we could think of. The second remark I would like to make relates to the world of work. Indeed, my most recent report presented to the UN General Assembly was on the issue of the working poor in work poverty. And although the estimates vary, we have at least 13% of the working population in the UK that is at risk of poverty, that lives in households that are affected by poverty. Some estimates are much higher even, and of course, part-time workers are more affected by this phenomenon than are full-time workers. But that is a very significant level. And the minimum wage today is not corresponding to the living wage that under human rights law would be required. The minimum wage, the minimum living wage is not actually protecting people from destitution, and it's even less true for the young adults below 20 years of age who have the national minimum wage rather than the living wage provided to them, which is, I believe, a situation that is discriminatory. Under human rights law, the minimum wage level should be regularly updated to take into account the evolution of the cost of living. And we have now more and more studies, including from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, that show that the concerns of price-wage spiral leading to increased inflation, that these concerns are often exaggerated, that in fact this is not happening in the countries such as Cyprus, Luxembourg, Belgium, who have a system of automatic indexation of wages to the cost of living, which I believe is the best way to secure the purchasing power of the working population in the country. One reason why wages remain low and why the share of economic growth that goes to workers has been decreasing over the years is because union rights are not fully respected in the country. And unions find it more and more difficult to operate in the current context. Let me give you 3 examples. First, the ban on hiring agency workers in order to compensate for workers that choose to strike has been removed. So that's a way to weaken the ability for unions to use strikes as a means to obtain better working conditions, including better wages. Secondly, the liability of unions when industrial action is started in unlawful conditions has been increased, which has a chilling effect on the union's ability to resort to strikes. And thirdly, the essential services requirements have been used increasingly to restrict the right to strike in the UK. So for all these reasons, unions find it more difficult to put pressure on employers to provide decent wages. That is, I think, the second area in which progress could be made in line with human rights law. The third is the need to protect people in poverty from being discriminated against. Under the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, there is a duty for governments to protect people from discrimination based on their socio-economic condition. The Covenant uses the words property or social origin to describe prohibited grounds of discrimination. In other terms, you cannot be discriminated against for the simple reason that you are poor. And this is what is imposed under Article 2, Paragraph 2 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Now, there are two dimensions to this. The first one is that in Scotland, in Wales, a duty is imposed on public service providers, on public bodies, to assess the impacts on poverty and inequality of the strategic decisions that they make. And so they must perform impact assessments to ensure that they pay due regard to the impact on people in poverty and on inequalities of the decisions that they intend to make. That obligation is not imposed in England on service providers in England, and that, I think, is a gap that could be filled. The second dimension is the need to be protected from what we call povertyism, which, to my mind, is as problematic as are racism, sexism, or homophobia. Povertyism is a word that describes the daily experience of people living in poverty that are subject to harassment, to various forms of discrimination from landlords, from employers, from school boards or school directors, and that are a major obstacle to escaping poverty. This was shown, for example, in the study on the hidden dimensions of poverty that was co-led by ATD Fourth World and Oxford University, and that covered 6 countries in the world, including the UK, and that showed that people in poverty speak not only about the lack of decent income, the lack of a decent job that pays fair wages, but they also speak about the humiliation they face, the discrimination they are being subjected to, the abuse from either private actors or from public administrations on a daily basis, the kind of stigmatization they are regularly subjected to. And quite frankly, as long as we have politicians that use a language about people in poverty that stigmatizes these people, that speaks about deserve, personal individual responsibility, or even lifestyle choices, povertyism will continue to be encouraged. And that is very much what Philip Alston, my esteemed predecessor, was describing when he spoke about the harsh and uncaring ethos that was currently characteristic of the welfare system in the UK as it has developed over the past few years. My fourth and final remark is about a rights-based approach to reducing poverty. I believe human rights, economic and social rights in particular, including by allowing a direct enforcement of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the European Social Charter, can play a major role in making the fight against poverty more effective for 3 reasons. First, because it empowers people in poverty. It radically changes how they relate to service providers and to public administrations. Service providers traditionally have been perceived as providing charity. They now are duty bearers who owe to people in poverty certain benefits, certain services. And beneficiaries in turn, who were gladly benefiting from the goodwill of service providers, will become rights holders, allowed to claim the benefits of certain protections, thus reducing shame and stigma, which is one major reason for the high rates of non-take-up of certain social benefits. So that's the first reason why relying on human rights is really important. The second reason is that it improves the effectiveness of social protection because it makes it easier for people to claim their benefits when they are unjustifiably excluded, thus ensuring that social protection will be more effective in reaching people that need it the most. If they have access to recourse mechanisms, including independent bodies, including judicial bodies, that will ensure that the system will have much less leakage and that people in poverty will benefit from social protection. And the third and final reason why adopting a rights-based approach is important is because social workers today are torn between the duty to provide support and advice to families, on one hand, and the expectation that they will reduce costs, that they will discourage fraud and abuse of the system. And social workers are torn between these conflicting expectations that are imposed on them. Let us dream of a social protection system that would be based on rights, allowing social workers to recast their role as ensuring that people have access to their rights and ensuring that they will put as much effort into ensuring people exercise these rights as they have put into ensuring that people get vaccinated against COVID to stem the spread of the pandemic. Indeed, ensuring effective protection of the right to food, the right to health, the right to housing, the right to work, the right to social security is in the public interest. Combating child poverty is an investment that has very high returns, as shown by the Nobel Prize in Economics laureate James Heckman. Studies show that £1 invested in combating child poverty provides a return of at least £7 in improved learning outcomes, in longer education, in higher productivity as adults once these children become productive adults. Moreover, preventing people from falling into poverty is much more efficient. It's a better use of public money than trying to rescue them from destitution once those preventative efforts have failed and once people have to be rescued from poverty, for example, by providing temporary emergency accommodation because social housing has not been sufficiently funded. So these are the 4 proposals I have, and I would like to again thank you for inviting me at this event, for allowing me to intervene here and to salute the terrific work that Just Fair has done with its partners. Thank you very much indeed.